Welcome, Joel here. I'm Andy Monnin. That's Joel Penn, just in case you were confused. And Joel, I noticed in that video, man, there was a lot of hits on another team.
Yeah, we like to feature the footage from the team up north. For one, having all those tackles against them was easy. And there's a little bit of a rivalry, so I'm curious, do we have some Ohio State fans in the room? Do we have a few? We do. We'll do a little test.
Okay.
OH?
Oh.
Did I just hear somebody say, Go Blue? Wow. You know, I thought this was a nice church. Good people. Do we have a few fans of the team up north? Okay, now you might think that would bother me to come all the way over here and then be welcomed with a Go Blue. You might think it would bother me, but the truth is, my understanding about this church is that it's all about reaching the lost. And so if you're a Michigan fan, you've come to the right place. So welcome.
Oh, it's good to have you, Joel.
Thanks.
Let's talk football for a little bit. Hey, you played for Ohio State. Which side of the ball did you play?
I played on the defensive side of the ball. I didn't have the hands to catch the ball, and I was hopefully a little quicker than the offensive lineman. But no, I played defensive tackle, so the position where you have to enjoy pain. That was my position. Okay.
So you started long before playing college football. You started in high school, grade school. Where'd your football career start?
Yeah, I started in Van Wert, Ohio. Do we have some Van Wert fans? Not really. Northwest Ohio, a lot of corn, not a lot of people. But I had humble beginnings on the football field. I started at the age of 9 playing youth football or PAL football, and I immediately fell in love with the game of football. I can tell you, I can sum up why I loved football so much in one word: violence. I loved being a small child, putting on little plastic pads, running around as fast as I could, and then just slamming my body into other small children. There was something magical about that. I wasn't very good, though. When I tried out for football, I was literally picked third from last. It was a cruel process. They want you to get mentally tough in the game of football. With baseball, I remember tried out for the baseball team. You try out, then they send you home, and then you get a call on the phone from the coach of the team where you've been picked. But in football, it was different. In football, we tried out, we ran through the cones, and then they just sat us down on the field, and they took turns picking us. And so as a kid, you got to see how good you were, because you got to see when you got picked. And out of like 50 kids, I was picked third from last. The sun was going down. I didn't know if I'd be picked at all. But
if that was a metaphor for your career.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it felt like. But yeah, started at the age of 9. I loved the game. My dad told me at a young age, he said, "Son, you're just like me. You have a great love for the game and exactly zero talent." And I said, "Thanks, Dad."
Yeah.
Thanks for the pep talk. But but that's how it all started.
So you play. What helped you keep going when you felt like, I don't know if this is going to end well?
Yeah, well, for me it was fun. So for me it wasn't necessarily about being the best guy on the team. I never thought I could be the best guy on the team, but I thought I could contribute. I grew up being taken to the Van Wert High School football games and seeing the guys play under the lights, and I thought, boy, if I can even just make the team and be a part of it, that'd be great. I mean, I love the game. I think the game of football is a great game. It's the quintessential team sport in the way that there's a different position for every different type of guy, no matter your size or shape. You know, there's a position for you on the football team, and some guys get the glory, and some guys, the only time you hear their name is when they do something wrong, you know, and so I just loved the game, and that's what kept me going, and I thought, yeah, if I can contribute, great, and little did I know that God had some other things in store.
Yeah, so you fast forward to your high school days, and you guys go to state. I put you at winning the state in the first service. That wasn't true. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a sore subject. We didn't quite win the state. My junior year, it was this Cinderella story. We made it into the playoffs by some flukish, anomaly. We made it in even though we had a 6-4 record, and we started upsetting teams. We won our region, went to the state semifinals, and we won that. We go to the state championship game, even though we weren't even supposed to be in the playoffs, and we went into 2 overtimes and lost by 1 point after a missed extra point in double overtime. And so it was hard for me to not think about that as I was watching the Ohio State game this year a little bit. But it was a fun ride, and we learned a lot.
Yeah. And so something changes along the way. You're obviously not third last on the team anymore as far as talent level. What changes? And then how does the whole recruiting process work?
Sure. Well, things did change. By God's grace, I was always a big guy. I was always tall. I was pretty lanky initially and very uncoordinated. However, in part because of my lack of talent, I developed a bit of a work ethic. My dad told me, he said, if you want to be any good, you better do as many push-ups as you can, as many sit-ups as you can every single night. And so I committed myself to that. I joined the wrestling team to focus on my physical conditioning. And as I worked hard and got bigger and stronger, that was helpful. But then as I kind of stopped growing height-wise, my coordination came. And by the time I was a junior, it just so happened I was not just the biggest and strongest guy on the field, I was about the fastest guy on the field as well, and that opened up doors for me at the college level. And the recruiting process, it all happened, again, very fast. After that state run, my performance that year, my junior year, which is really when everything came together for me, I was named All-State, and coaches started coming through and getting looks at me and started receiving offers. For me, it was obvious I wanted to play for Ohio State. So if I could get an offer from the Buckeyes, I was going to take it.
Did it start there? Did you? Was that your first offer, or were there others along the way that built up to that?
There were others, and the way it worked for me, at least, is that first I got attention from the smaller schools, and offers started rolling in, and then bigger and bigger schools were visiting. And before long, Jim Tressel walked through the doors of my high school. He had just been hired. In fact, he had not even coached a game. He had been hired and offered me a scholarship, and I became the first guy to commit to play for the Buckeyes to Coach Tressel.
Wow. So what was it like to play for Coach Tressel?
Coach Tressel's an incredible guy. I feel very, very blessed to have played for him. He taught me that you can be a genuinely good guy who's faithful, who cares about his players. I mean, he would refer to his players as his kids. And he would say that, these are my kids.
Yeah.
I remember when I first got there, I probably didn't have as much patience as I should have. And I was meeting with him for our annual one-on-one meeting, and I said, Coach, there's some guys who are pretty big distractions on the team with their decision-making. Have you considered whether you should keep them around? I mean, this is what I said. And he said, Joel, this might be their last chance if these kids don't figure it out now. I mean, he genuinely cared so much. And so he taught me that you can be a genuinely good guy and maintain the highest of standards imaginable and reach the highest of heights without having to cut corners to get there.
Yeah. You played for Ohio State. How was that experience, and what kind of success did you guys see?
It was a great experience. I recommend it to anybody who's considering it. Yeah, for me, it was surreal. I mean, I had never even dreamt of achieving that because at a young age, I wasn't very athletic, so I never even set it as a goal to play for a place like Ohio State, but it just kind of happened, and it was surreal. I was very grateful to be there. I will say this, in a way, it's like anything else. We as humans have this strange propensity to think if we could just achieve that next thing or just obtain that next thing, whether it's that when you're a kid, if it's that gift on Christmas morning, if I can just get that gift, or when in the professional world, if I can just get that promotion, if I could just get that girl or whatever it is, I think all problems will be solved. But in a similar way, it was incredible, it was surreal, and yet it doesn't solve all your problems. It doesn't answer all your questions. It doesn't fulfill your greatest longings. When I was there, we did have a success. My freshman year, we won the national championship game in 2002. I don't know if did anybody stay awake for that game back in 2002? Most people aren't old enough. Most people weren't born in 2002. It was a long time ago. And then my senior year in 2006, we beat Michigan. In the game of the century, the 6-year-old century at that point, and played for the national championship. Didn't win that one, but won 3 Big Ten championships while I was there as well. So it was a lot of fun.
What was a highlight for you personally in that experience?
Yeah, it would have to be that Michigan game my senior year. It was fun to be a part of the national championship, and that was the highlight in its own way. However, I was just a freshman. I was redshirted that year. And so while I was named Scout Team Player of the Week twice, I was redshirted, and so I was watching. And my senior year, we were able to maintain a preseason #1 ranking all the way through until the championship game. But playing against Michigan, we were ranked #1, they were ranked #2. It was a night game, and had to sack that game, and it was pretty exciting.
That's highlight reel kind of stuff. So, not everybody's got an opportunity to play or had an opportunity to play at that level and experience those kind of things. What would you say to somebody about what's one thing they may not know about, being part of a football program in a Power 5 school?
Well, the biggest shock to me was probably the speed. The size was shocking in its own way. I'm 6'5", and I guess you get used to people who, being around people who aren't 6'5". But then when you go and 6'5" is like the average height, it's kind of strange. But then the speed was even more shocking because on the field, in high school, I was very fast. And then all of a sudden, I was literally one of the slowest guys on the field. Yeah. I remember playing against Texas my senior year, and we had this particular defense where at the defensive tackle place, we ran a stunt, and I had to come around to contain. And sure enough, they run a reverse. And here's this guy from Texas with the ball, and I'm just out there in space, 300-pound defensive tackle, and I'm supposed to try to chase this guy down? No, it didn't happen. I got embarrassed on national television. Yeah. And so the speed is just amazing.
Yeah. Wow. That's all part of the game. It's part of life. The mental aspect, I know there's a lot of physical specimens. You can work that part. How is the mental part of the game maybe even more important? Yeah,
it is more important. I'm glad you mentioned that because on one level, if you make it to a place like Ohio State and follow the regimens and work hard, you'll physically land in whatever place you're going to land. I mean, you're going to put in the time and effort, but it really, the differentiator becomes the mental game. If you're able to slow down the game and react and be able to do it mentally, it really does set guys apart. And that's the other piece that was kind of shocking to me. In high school, practices were probably about 2 hours long, and then we would spend an hour or so watching film. At Ohio State, we were at the facility all the time. I mean, I would get there at noon, and we would watch film right up until practice around 2. We'd have a 2-hour practice, but then we would be there for film until 6, and then there would be weekend film. Notebooks would go home with you. I mean, the mental aspect was exponentially more challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to shift gears for a minute. The Michigan game you said was probably the highlight of your career, your experience. Personally, you had a great game. When you grew up, what was the thing that changed the trajectory of your life? What was the greatest decision that you made in your life?
Yeah, well, I mean, by far, in fact, it's in its own class. When I came to faith, my freshman year of high school, that changed the trajectory of my life, of my eternity. I had grown up in the church, and I called myself a Christian because I went to church and I could recite the prayers and creeds and things like that. But as a freshman in high school, I attended a Bible study, and that was the first time I had heard, in a way that made sense to me, what it means to have a relationship with Jesus. I had heard that terminology before, and it just sounded like church talk. Oh, that's just something church people say to make themselves feel good or something, relationship with Jesus. But it wasn't until a pastor explained it to me. He said, we're all created to be in a relationship with Jesus. And I thought, that sounds fine. And he said, but we've all, each and every one of us, myself included, have messed that up. We've all sinned against God. We've turned from God, rejected God. We've chosen to serve ourselves instead of God. And because of that, the relationship we're meant to have with God has been destroyed. We're separated from God. That's why we feel so alone and empty inside, is because we're separated from our Creator. And we deserve to be separated from God forever. And I was like, oh, okay. And he said, but here's the great news. He said, God didn't leave us in that state. About 2,000 years ago, God stepped out of eternity and came into history, became a man named Jesus. And Jesus lived the life we could never live, a perfect life, a sinless life. And then Jesus died for our sin to pay the penalty for our sin. And then 3 days later, he rose from the dead. And he told me that if I would simply put my trust in Jesus and believe in Jesus to save me, that he would. And upon hearing that, my life was changed. I mean, the Bible says things about being born again, about becoming a new creation. I would later read those words. I discovered it to be true because I experienced it. All of a sudden, it was like my life was totally changed. Jesus was my best friend, and I knew that everything I had in my life, including football, was only there to serve him and to make him known. And so my life's been different ever since.
Pretty awesome. You know, when I was a kid, I used to, I'd go to church, but I still had this fear that what would happen after I died. And you had expressed in first service a little bit about that you had a similar kind of experience.
Yeah, so I did share this. I'm glad you must have liked what I said because I didn't. I think maybe you could relate. I remember being a kid and having a summer job mowing lawns. Any lawn mowers, summer job, lawn? Okay, yeah, it's a good way to make some money just sitting on a lawnmower. I had this job, and I would ride this riding lawnmower, and the engine was so loud that even if I tried to listen to music, I couldn't hear it. And so it was just like I was alone with my thoughts riding on this riding lawnmower for hours on end. And as I would sit on that mower, I would often think, well, I think about a lot of stuff, but sometimes my mind would go to those bigger questions of life that were troubling to me. I would think about, what's the meaning of life? And is there really a God out there? And what's going to happen to me when I die? And when I would think about those things, I would get very uncomfortable. And I would get kind of scared because I didn't feel like I had answers to those questions. Yes. Even though I went to church and even though I called myself a Christian, that was all just mental and ritual to me. But then when I heard about what Jesus had done and came to know him, those questions were answered and my life was changed.
Yeah, and I think there probably folks here today felt the same way I did, same way you did. They got a fear about the future. They're in church, or maybe they're trying to figure some things out, but they've never said yes to a relationship with Jesus, which gives you that security that everything's going to be okay no matter what. You discovered that. It wasn't enough for you just to discover it. Then God began to use that in your life. You began to preach in high school. I'm a preacher now, and I know when I was, I started preaching about 35, I was scared to death to do that. And you started in high school. Maybe that's the time to start. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, I wasn't smart enough to be scared. I guess I should have been. Yeah, when I came to faith, it was so clear to me the connection between hearing the good news about Jesus and then my life being changed. And so I thought, everybody needs to hear this. And I almost remember being upset at the time, like, why hasn't anyone shared this with me before? Like, are we keeping it some sort of secret or something? Like, is this some sort of conspiracy? And so I thought I need to share this with anyone who will listen. And so I started sharing it with my teammates and classmates and teachers and coaches. I probably annoyed everybody, but I just wanted people to know this Jesus who had changed my life. And my pastor saw this in me, and so started giving me opportunities to share with others. Put me in front of the youth group to say, hey, share your story. And soon he went out of town and asked if I'd fill in to preach for him. And I was 17 at the time, and I was like, yeah, absolutely, I would love to preach. I've never done it before. What should I preach about? And he said, well, we follow a preaching schedule. We're on Isaiah chapter 6. It's Trinity Sunday, and so you need to speak on the Trinity. And I said, no problem. And so I read a C.S. Lewis book. I plagiarized the chapter on the Trinity, and the sermon went well. Well, word kind of spread throughout my hometown, and other pastors started having me come in to preach. By the time I graduated from high school, I was literally traveling the state. In fact, by that time, I had traveled out of state to preach in churches, and then when I got to Ohio State, I continued the same type of thing.
What's amazing is when you're faithful in the small things, God uses you in the big things. And it wasn't much later that when you went to Ohio State that you had an opportunity maybe to share your faith in a much bigger way, and even getting writing a chapter in Coach Tressel's book. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, sure. Well, Coach Tressel wrote a book called The Winner's Manual, titled after a binder that all the players would get that outlined some of the fundamentals of being a winner, and one of those fundamentals is faith. And in his chapter on faith, he told a story of my senior year. We had always done a campus outreach in partnership with Campus Crusade. I was in Athletes in Action and crew. And my senior year, I went to the leaders of those ministries and I said, we always do this campus outreach. It's really great. We see hundreds of students come. What if we opened it up to the whole community? And we couldn't think of a place big enough, like a lecture hall big enough. So I said, what if we rented out St. John Arena that holds, like 13,000 people? And I told Coach Trestle this. I said, Coach, I'd love for you to speak and love for some of my teammates to speak, and we'll just invite the community, see what happens. And he said, well, Joel, that sounds okay. I don't know how much it'll cost. I don't know if anybody will show up. If you do this, I'll show up, but just don't have too high of hopes, And so I said, okay, well, so we went to work, and I talked to the facility manager of St. John Arena, and I said, hey, we want to rent out the place. It's for an Athletes in Action gathering. He said, how many people usually come to your Athletes in Action meetings? I said, about 30 people come normally, But we're going to invite others. And, we held a press conference, didn't know what would happen, but by God's grace, that night, the fire marshal actually had to close the doors. Over 13,000 people came.
Wow.
And we shared the gospel, and that night, yeah. And that night, over 1,000 of them indicated that they wanted to take the step to follow Jesus with their lives. And so it was cool to see,
That's pretty awesome.
See God show up.
God honors the risks that we take. He honors the risks that we take as a church, as a people, as individuals. In your life kind of illustrates that. So now God is compelling you to do other things. Your first ministry is your family. Let's see, maybe on the screen you put that in there. You got a fairly large family there.
Yeah. Most people see this photo and they say, wow, Joel, 6 kids. That's awesome. And I say, yeah, well, my wife is in the photo. She just happens to be very beautiful, and she doesn't age because she was a gymnast at Ohio State. She's now a competitive CrossFitter. People say, does that mean that I'm not the best athlete in the family? And I say, definitely means that. I don't even think I'm the second best at this point. But we have 5 children, ages 14, 12, 10, 8, 5. Joel, Judah, Luther, Vera, Levi, and 4 of them are with me today over here. Kids, why don't you stand up? Judah, Luther, Vera, and Levi. Oh boy. Judah. And well, Bethany and my oldest, Joel the third, are at our church. They have serving duty, so the Lord has blessed us.
Yeah. Wow. And so fast forward even a little bit further. I mean, that's your first ministry, but God has put something else on your heart that you probably, just like your football career, you back in 8th grade or 7th grade, whenever you started, you had no expectation that you would end up playing for Ohio State and beating Michigan and experiencing some of the things you did. Probably the same in ministry. You know, you just go out and you say yes to God and the thing that he shows you, and when you're faithful in those small things, he begins to give you more and more platform, maybe more and more opportunity. And now God has put you on giving you another opportunity. Tell us about that. And by the way, I've asked Joel to share this. I want to encourage him to share this because I think that there's an open door in our community. You know, we're all on mission, right? We're a church that sends out. We bring in, we raise up people who follow Jesus Christ, and we send them back out in the community to do what God's called us to do. And we feel like there's a huge open door in the next gen, and that kind of lines up. I wasn't necessarily planning all this, but tell us about the thing that you're involved with that you helped found, really.
Yeah, well, the background is that, like you said, I feel like everything I've done, I've just been compelled to do. It's just, you know, what will reach more people with the gospel. So coming out of Ohio State, I got into speaking full-time, developed a speaking ministry of speaking in high schools and middle schools, for school assemblies and outreach events, and the Lord has blessed it. We now have a speakers bureau. We've been in over 3,000 schools nationwide over the last 15 years. But in 2018, an opportunity popped up that I just felt compelled to get involved. People in my hometown called me to tell me that they had started a released time religious instruction program, and I didn't know what that was. Has anybody in the room, has anyone ever heard the term released time religious instruction? All my kids have. Great. Just a few. Yeah, we find that maybe 5% of people have ever heard of release time, but we've become convinced it's the single greatest missed opportunity to reach the next generation with the Word of God. And here's why. Here's what release time is. It's the practice of students being released from public school. So public school students are released during school hours. I can't overstate the importance of that phrase. During school, they're released to attend religious classes provided the program